We're breaking into our programming here on Al Jazeera and taking you straight to the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, where we're showing you the scenes of the city centre very close to the Parliament building, where in the last hour or so, smoke has been rising from parts of the Parliament building. We believe parts are on fire or have been infiltrated by protesters. The situation is very fluid at the moment. We're trying to work out exactly which bits of Parliament have been set alight, and also where those parliamentarians who are debating the very controversial finance bill are. Security has been tight around the city centre and around the capital throughout these 5 of 7 days of rage that have been called by civil society over the proposed bill to increase taxes on some of the most basic commodities that Kenyans buy, including things like bread. And the proposals by the President William Ruto have caused great consternation and anger across Kenya, and not just in the capital. The local media have been providing most of the images that we can see right now. We have got Malcolm Webb, our correspondent, who joins us now from Nairobi. Malcolm, obviously the situation very fluid. We know about parts of the Parliament building being at least attacked or smoke coming from it. What more do we know about the situation so far?
Well, I'm standing on the street right outside Parliament right now, and down this street we can see smoke. I think it's tear gas. I can see police firing tear gas at protesters. I see plumes of smoke coming from other nearby parts of the city centre. There's a very heavy police presence. There are also some protesters near the Parliament building. But what we saw on live video feeds just a short while ago, some people who appeared to be shot, being carried away, people with what appeared to be gunshot wounds. We saw video of plainclothes security operatives carrying weapons who appeared to be shooting at demonstrators. And then we also heard that, as you mentioned, that some of the demonstrators had managed to enter the Parliament building. Right now, it appears to be secured. I'm standing just outside the fence, but there's still protest activity and police in the street immediately outside.
Tell us what the security situation is like there. Obviously has been pretty heavy in the days leading up to these protests. It hasn't just been a protest that's been specific to today. There have been 3 or 4 days of rage as the Kenyan youth part of the community have been describing this.
Well, we were here a week ago, and it was Tuesday last week that the first demonstration was called. A couple of hundred people marched near Parliament. They were dispersed by police using tear gas. And they called for the demonstration to continue on Thursday last week. That was at the next sitting of Parliament, when it was due to discuss this highly controversial finance bill, which is aiming to increase taxes. Thursday's demonstration was much bigger. What appeared to be thousands of people in Nairobi, and also in about 20 other towns and cities across the country. Then that day, 1 or 2 people were shot dead, reportedly by police or by plainclothes security operatives trying to break up the crowd at the end of the day. And that prompted campaigners to call for 7 days of rage over the weekend. There's been various different campaigns. For example, protesters turning up at churches where politicians often attend to campaign against support for the finance bill. There were demonstrators outside a church where President William Ruto himself attended, and much of the congregation was kept out of the church apparently because the security thought that there were protesters, many protesters among them. And the campaigners had called also for a street protest again today, because today was the next sitting of Parliament to discuss this bill. So that's why we're seeing so much activity on the streets of central Nairobi today, which started peacefully in the morning, but then in some places near Parliament turned into sort of running battles between protesters and police, who were pushing them back with water cannon and tear gas. And then just in the last hour, things appeared to escalate, including seeing those demonstrators with gunshot wounds being carried away outside Parliament, and then those reports of demonstrators having got into Parliament as well.
Malcolm, the pictures that we're able to show our viewers here on Al Jazeera are threefold. Firstly, again, some of the pictures from the Parliament where flames are billowing from an out section, you might say, of part of that Parliament building. We're not quite sure which bit of the Parliament building there is. We don't see anybody evacuating the building at the moment. Then we have, of course, the city centre where very heavily armed security personnel are trying to keep crowds, I would say, and protesters at bay. Some of them on horse-mounted, some of them are horse-mounted security personnel. And the third image that we're seeing is a little bit further away, still security personnel on the streets with demonstrators scarcely seen here. We can, I think, also join Zain Basravi, our other correspondent in the Kenyan capital. Zain, just tell us where you are and what you can see right now.
Well, we spent the morning at the area where the protesters and the police were carrying out these confrontations. The morning began slow. There was just a group of a few groups of dozens of scattered protesters. And in a few hours, it turned into a very thick group of hundreds of protesters, and that swelled in hours to thousands of protesters carrying out violent clashes with the police. They were breaking bits of pavement, hurling rocks at the police. As we were departing, the crowd was simply swelling, and one of the protest organizers told us that within the next few hours, they were anticipating that with people coming from surrounding towns and villages, that the number of people surrounding the capital with a plan to surrounding the parliament with a plan to occupy the parliament will swell to double its size. And even though the vote has gone through, what many people are saying that the Kenyan president may have gotten his bill passed through parliament. He may have gotten what he wanted, but it has come at the cost of the parliament. The people that we met, the protesters, say that they plan on occupying it. Parts of it have been set on fire. We know that protesters have entered the parliament, and we are hearing reports that several protesters, at first it was 2, then 5, now a few more, at least half a dozen perhaps, have been shot and killed throughout the course of the morning. And that has only fueled the very, very sustained and intensifying anger of the thousands of people that are now pouring in to the heart of the Kenyan capital. And what they tell us is that they wanted a peaceful protest, but they were provoked by the police and they were provoked by the actions of their leaders. And they say that what they want now is a future determined by them, and all they want is freedom and an end to the sustained systemic corruption and mismanagement that has brought the country's economy to the state it is in now.
OK, Zain, the pictures that we're now showing our viewers are certainly a very large crowd of people, it seems, running away from the Parliament building, but within its grounds, as if they are being pushed out, perhaps, or leaving of their own accord, but certainly many hundreds of them leaving that area of the Parliament building. Our second images of the city centre, horse-mounted security personnel, in some cases we think smoke grenades and maybe water cannon being used. It is quite a long shot. We can't quite see exactly what's going on. And our third shot is a bit more further away with security personnel on a main high street, I think, and reinforcements going in, but certainly cordoning off certain parts of the city centre. It has to be said, when we've spoken to you throughout the day, the demonstrations were noisy, they were loud, but they were good-natured.
That is correct. It began with songs. People responded to tear gas with cheers. They responded to the police firing water cannons and tear gas with songs, singing protest songs to say that we will not stand by and let evil prevail. And that very quickly turned as the number of people grew. And as it became clear that those in power, the protests were not changing the minds of those in power. And as it became clear that the vote was going to go forward, and as the vote passed, anger became more palpable. And when the police started using live fire ammunition, when reports of live fire being used and people dying began to come into the crowds converged. Now, where we are in Nairobi, it is basically a gridlock. Protesters have created gridlock, the crisscrossing streets. There isn't a street you can go down where there aren't tires being burned, where there aren't large numbers of protesters. Again, those numbers continuing to swell as the hours go on. And those people continue to come in large numbers, and the police are certainly overwhelmed. Now, this ebb and flow of protesters being pushed back and the police moving forward, this has carried on, but the sheer volume of people now pouring into Nairobi, the sheer number of demonstrators on the streets, it is too much even for the heavy police presence that we saw the morning begin with.
And of course, again, these images continue. We're being able to show the latest pictures that we possibly can as we get our cameras there as well. We've heard from Malcolm, who's talked about parts of the Parliament building on fire from where he is. Again, we're seeing still some of the same pictures again of people leaving the Parliament ground in our top right-hand corner of the screen for our viewers. City centre Nairobi is the main picture you can see on your screen, where those vehicles, which would have been security service carriers carrying personnel, would have been brought in earlier in the day. They're parked up, obviously, on the outskirts of the capital as those security personnel have gone in to the city centre. But also we're seeing, Zain, security personnel shooting what I would describe as smoke bombs. Maybe you say rubber bullets from some of the eyewitnesses that you've been dealing with. We've got injured being given triage at least and first aid on some of these images that we're seeing now near ambulances. It has to be said that these demonstrations are certainly pretty violent at the moment from what we can see. They've gone from being very well-mannered to being more angry, yet they are reciprocated and replicated in other parts of the country. Kilifi, Mombasa, Kisumu, Nakuru, Eldoret. The temperament there, we're not hearing of any violence there, but there is seething anger, and there has been seething anger this past week.
That's exactly correct. Where I am, I can actually hear the sound of what sounds like gunfire now coming from the direction of the Parliament. Smoke was billowing from there. We heard reports that members of Parliament, even the Deputy Speaker, had to be evacuated as the protesters started coming in. So very shortly after this bill was passed, the Parliament was overrun. So at what cost did the Parliament pass this bill? That's going to be the question going forward. But you're exactly right. The anger is intense. The frustration is really, by many accounts, when you speak to Kenyans here on the streets, generations in the making. What people continue to tell us is they have now abandoned fear. This is not the generation of their parents, they say. It is not the generation of their grandparents. They are tired of the intimidation and threats of governments of the past that have ruled Kenya often with an iron fist. And they say that fear, those fear tactics no longer apply. The young generation will simply not acquiesce to it, no matter the cost. We spoke to one man who said that so many of us go to high school, we go to college, we come out and we are jobless. So as such, there are so many people that are jobless, the unemployment rate is so high, we can continue to protest as long as it takes because there are no jobs to go back to. And the anger continues to pour out in all of the different testimonials you get from men, from women. This tax bill really is so invasive. It hits people that were already struggling, even further penetrating their daily lives. And that is something that they say they are sick of, they no longer want, and they want the government to either address the problems or get out of the way and let them do it.
Zain, thanks very much. Zain Basravi there for us in Nairobi. And for those of you joining us here on Al Jazeera, these are the latest pictures coming out of Nairobi, Kenya's capital, where people who have been taken to the streets in protest at their government's proposal to make changes to the finance bill, which would have increased the cost of basic goods such as oil, bread and the likes, has now passed through Parliament. Anger has now spilt beyond the streets of Nairobi, and we're seeing images, as we can show you, of parts of the Parliament building on fire or certainly attacked, and there's plumes of billowing black smoke coming out. We've got heavily secured police, you might say, heavily armoured police and security services, both on horseback and on the ground, venturing into the city centre to try and disperse these crowds, many of them young people. And as you see and watch those images, I'm going to bring in Hamza Mohammed. He's one of our journalists here in Al Jazeera and been keeping an eye on this story for some time. Just tell me what you think of these images compared to what was going on 7 days ago when people were peacefully protesting.
So what we see is not surprising. it's actually expected for those of us who follow Kenyan. The young Kenyans have been unhappy for so long. And the reason being, the government has been slowly increasing the taxes for the past few years. But now it has gone to a point where they cannot take it anymore. They've been peacefully coming out onto the streets, meeting their MPs, going to their offices, saying, do not vote for this bill. The government's response has been to tear gas, arrest some of them, and beat even some of them. We know at least 2 people who have died in these protests. Kenyan MPs are one of the most unpopular lawmakers on the continent. And the reason being is they are one of the best paid across the world. A Kenyan MP gets paid more than an MP in the UK, the US, or even Japan. But when you speak to Kenyans, they will tell you, we don't see what we pay for. The fact that we pay them handsomely and the service that they provide for us is almost negligible. So what you see is high corruption, lack of services, and one of the most, like in terms of taxes, they pay a lot of money. So when you see them storming parliament, this is anger that's now at a level that we haven't seen in Kenya before.
Driving this protest is no one. It is a organic protest, as many commentators have suggested, as our correspondents have talked about on the ground. It's not led by any political party. It's sheer anger and annoyance. And this is now driven, as you say, to the most basic of commodities that I think most people across the world can relate to. When taxes increase on oil and bread, and most probably eggs and all the basic things you need in your fridge, then you're going to get angry.
Let me just... the opposition, even the opposition leader, recently tweeted one of the protesters who were asking for the opposition not to get involved in this protest. His response was he is proud and that the country belongs to the young. So the opposition, they are staying away from it. They don't want the government to point finger and saying the protests have been driven by the opposition. Kenya has been on a borrowing spree. They've borrowed from everyone and anyone that they could borrow money from. When you look at the GDP
Hamza, let me just introduce, why have they borrowed money? What for?
So for some of the projects are building roads, building trains from the port to Nairobi. Some are things that the average Kenyan does not see. What they know is there is high level of corruption involved in these projects, big infrastructure. So they've been borrowing so much. The cost, the interest repayments, credit rating agencies estimate that Kenya pays 1/3 of its revenue in interest for these loans that they have taken. The country's debt, when you look at it, to GDP, it stands at 70%. Kenya is a developing country. Kenya does not have oil or minerals, so to speak, to pay for this. It's the Kenyan taxpayer who has to foot this bill. In terms of the public services, they don't see, when the average Kenyan, when they go to hospital, they don't see doctors. They cannot get medication. So the fact that they pay in high taxes and their government is borrowing, they don't see any reason. And recently, this year, the government has been paying civil servants late. And this has not happened before in Kenya. This is something that's very unique. So the Kenyan youth, who make up 2/3 of the population, have had enough. And what they want now is not just government not borrowing, but they also don't want the taxes to increase any further.
We're seeing these pictures now for, I say, our viewers who are watching and also listening on radio in various parts of the world, gunfire and certainly maybe rubber bullets being shot. Are you familiar with this part of the Parliament building here in Nairobi? Would you be able to identify where we think that fire is coming from?
So the Parliament is in the central business district. Before you get to the building itself, there's a couple of perimeters for security reasons. From the pictures, when I look at it, it looks like the perimeter. I've reported from here several times. What you see is the outside in terms of the fence. This seems to be that they've jumped the fence and they're burning. But for optics, this is something that you often see with the Kenyan government, with the authorities. First, what you would see is tear gas and rubber bullets to provoke the protesters. Once the protesters have been provoked, what they tend to do is they would throw stones, they would break windows. Then the government would say, these are not peaceful protesters, they're thugs. Then they will come in heavy-handed. This is when you see, live ammunition being used, mass arrest, and even targeting of the protest leaders.
We'll keep an eye on those images with you, Hamza. We know that you're not going to go away as we collect more information about what's going on, certainly in the Kenyan capital. Let's cross over to Catherine Soy, who's in Kisumu. Catherine, reports we're getting officially now as one person dead in Nairobi. We knew there was seething anger across the country. We know you've met people where you are in Kisumu. Just explain the situation where you are, and obviously you may be seeing some of the pictures that we are too, and how that's going down.
Yes, and we have been speaking to people here in Nairobi, and thousands of protesters have been marching through the streets of Kisumu. Some of them were saying that they want to go to the State House here. Others are saying that they wanted to go to the Treasury building. But many of them are very frustrated. They say they are all sharing the same language, saying reject the finance bill, reject the finance bill. It is not doing us any good service. A lot of people that we've been talking to are saying that the economy is not great. They're talking about joblessness. People don't have jobs, yet the government is saying that they should pay taxes, which is not possible. And they also say that the government has been mismanaging funds. So even if they pay taxes, if they don't want, if they want to pay taxes, then I mean, this services that are being rendered are not there at all. So people are angry. We're talking about young generation. 65% of Kenyans are below 35 years old. Many of them, other protests, are in their 20s, and they say that they have the power in numbers, and that's why they're utilizing that power, and they're going to call out the leaders, because enough is enough, they say.
Catherine, we're just seeing pictures from inside Parliament at the moment, and quite a bit of devastation. It looks like maybe in a meeting room or a cafeteria area, but certainly there's been a bit of a rampage going on with a great deal of damage. We're all seeing an aerial shot from Nairobi, sort of a rooftop shot certainly, of military personnel, heavily armed, going in, confronting what it seems may be protesters on the street. But again, it seems to be quite peaceful. There's not any gunfire or anything, but certainly trucks going through. Those shots are frozen for us now. You have been speaking to people where you have been in your part of southern Kenya. How angry are they about the basic commodities and the potential for their price to increase because of these taxes?
Well, they're very angry, and we're not just talking about Kisumu. We've been following the protests in places like Eldoret. This is where the president comes from. Thousands of protesters have been on the street. We have been told that politicians were trying to tell the protesters to tone down. We do not want to embarrass the president, but the protesters are saying that no, they have to protest. They say that life is so difficult, and the thing is that they have gotten so much support from Kenyans. I mean, we speak to Kenyans who are not even participating in these protests, and they're saying that, well done to the young people. This has to be done. We're seeing, just ordinary Kenyans helping and giving the protesters water and juices. We're seeing also that in business premises, business owners are basically allowing protesters to get into their premises when the police are attacking. So this, we're being told by many people that this is an organic protest. And now we see this violence that is happening in Nairobi. People here in Kisumu are watching, and they say they believe that some of those protesters have been planted, that this was supposed to be a peaceful protest. but things have changed. Even here, the protesters are still protesting in some areas, and they're saying that they will watch to see what's happening, and they are still and standing by the protesters in Nairobi.
Catherine, we won't be going away, I know, too far. We'll be coming back to you shortly for more of an update from your part of Kenya.
Make sure to subscribe to our channel, get the latest news from Al Jazeera.